this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good, I hope. Everything going good? I'm preparing, even though I know the show's a little bit staggered on the release, I am preparing for spring. All right. Today, I have a screen porch, which I winterized, took everything down, all my chickens. I de-winterized everything in anticipation that the temperatures are starting to go back up and we're not going to get anything where I'm going to be like, oh, crap. And I know weather can get weird, but so far it looks that way. So I'm in anticipation of springtime. So you could tell I'm done with the cold for a while until the summer rolls around, and then I'll be ready to deal with the cold again. But outside of that, and of course, everybody's, I always make the comment about commercialization now, of course it's Easter and all that stuff. And, it seems like the year goes by going from commercialized holiday to the next one. And what was it? The other day, I received one of these well, it was more like a catalog, which, by the way, there are still companies out there that send out catalogs in the mail. It wasn't addressed to me. It was one of those that ends up in your mailbox, but it's the resident. And I said, let me look at it. Because sometimes they do have unusual things that you... And I'm leafing through it. They've got stuff there already for... I guess this is for the person that is into celebrating. They already had stuff for Halloween and Thanksgiving and uh, Christmas, holiday at the end of the year. In other words, they were already catering to these people that, hey, be ready. I was like, holy crap. Wait a minute. No. Yeah, threw it in the trash. Just like, none of this. No, before you know it, it's like, talk about time flies when you're having fun and even when you're not. Well, yeah, no, I got, that old self-help, live in the now. Yeah, that's my, that's the thing. Live in the now, like as in today, the next 24 hours. Anyway, but let's get on to the good part. The good part is who is the guest today at Stories of the Supernatural. This is the first time he's been here. His name is Larry E. Arnold. He is director of PSI Parascience International. Now, after leaving Lafayette College and a brief career in electrical engineering, Larry founded Parascience International in 1976 to pursue the exploration of Fortean anomalies in consciousness. His controversial article published in August of 1978 titled Meltdown at TMI 2 would 8 months later be termed uncannily accurate by the Philadelphia Inquirer in presaging the future of the nuclear power plant's impossible Class 9 meltdown near his home. An author of 4 pioneering books, The Parapsychological Impact of the Accident at 3 Mile Island, The Reiki Handbook, and ABLAZE, The Mysterious Fires of Spontaneous Human Combustion, which was translated into Japanese in 1998, is regarded by many as the world's expert on spontaneous human combustion, and consequently by others as a mystery monger and world-class fool. He is published in, among others, Fate, Fortean Times, Info Journal, Life, Pennsylvania Association of Arson Investigators, Newsletter, Pennsylvania Magazine, Pursuit, Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained, Esoterra out of Germany, Science Digest, Seeing Journal, Rainbows, Susquehanna Monthly Magazine, UFO Annual, UFO Report, and UFO Universe. He has been a guest on hundreds of radio and internet radio programs, including Howard Stern, The Art Bell Show, and multiple episodes of Coast to Coast AM. He co-produced for and has appeared on numerous television programs, including That's Incredible and Best of That's Incredible. That was out of ABC, and then The Unexplained on A&E, American Heroes Channel, Unexplained Mysteries, The Unreal World, The Fifth Estate, Beyond Belief. Boy, he's been everywhere. The Unexplained Files, Testers in Weird or What, and Weird or What, Investigation X, and The Unexplained Files, Fringe, out of Fox and Fox Family, Extremely Weird. Well, it's that Fox has so many channels. History International, ITV4, Modern Miracles, Medical Mysteries on the Maury Povich Show, Unsolved Mysteries, The Other Side, Is It Real? Which is on National Geographic TV, Counters with the Unexplained, Investigation X, The Unexplained Files, Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings and Weird or What. I could keep going, but I'm going to lose all my time of interviewing him. As of 2023, The Unexplained Files episodes like the most aired of all Science Channel's programming. He's lectured about the paranormal at Albright University, American University, Drew University, Elizabethtown College, Harrisburg Area Community College, Lebanon Valley College, Marist College, Messiah College, Shippensburg University, the University of Nebraska, and the Arthur Findlay College for Psychical Studies in England. His unofficial website is parascience.com. We'll repeat that at the end for the podcast listeners. But anyway, help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Larry?
Hi, Marlene. Thank you for that wonderfully generous introduction.
No, that
We're
was great.
delighted to be with you this evening.
Wait a minute. I'm going to run out my interview time. Okay. I mean, I'm going to ask you, how did you get into this field back in the 70s, it sounds like? Coincidence or what?
Yeah, when we were studying mechanical engineering at Lafayette College in our sophomore year, we had a shift in consciousness. And we didn't dismiss the scientific methodology that we had been raised in and did not throw out our interest in science and in mysteries. But that shift in consciousness led us into fields of psychic phenomena, means to broaden one's consciousness, and into the whole realm of Forteana, things that science and scientists had been documenting with veracity and authenticity, but couldn't explain, and consequently too often seemed to be ignoring what they were actually witnessing having happened. When we were in junior high school, we read a book by Frank Edwards called Stranger Than Science. And in that book, he had a chapter devoted to incredible cremations and specifically described one specific case that happened in your state of Florida on the West Coast in St. Petersburg that burned up strangely a woman named Mary Hardy Reeser. At that time, it was said that she was an example of something called spontaneous human combustion, certainly a Fortean phenomenon. And after we left mechanical engineering and we're ending our work in the electrical engineering trade, we remembered that book that we read in junior high school and thought, could there really be something here, or had that author just made up a fascinating story to sell a couple more paperback books?
Right.
We went to the Library of Congress, pulled up microfilm in their newspaper archives, and found out that the death of Mary Reeser in 1951 was a legitimate front page news story. And it seemed to have a lot of very unusual, mystifying aspects to it.
How far back did this occur, this Mary Reeser thing?
Mary Reeser met her flaming fate in July of 1951.
Okay, so that was a few years back by the time that you were researching it. Go ahead.
Yeah, quite a gap. We thought, could this be a one-off case where the officials just kind of overlooked something that should have been easily understood and explainable, or was this a really true bona fide scientific and medical anomaly that could not at that time be properly solved?
Right, and let me ask you, this by the newspaper and the investigators of that date and time, is this what they called it, as human combustion?
They did. Yeah.
Okay.
The history of SHC, spontaneous human combustion, or as we prefer to call it now, sudden human cremation, keeping the acronym of SHC, historically goes back into the medical records into the 14 and 1500s. It was a hotly debated, if you were part of the expression, subject in the 17 and up until the middle of the 1800s. At that time, a noted German chemist, von Liebig, decided that he was going to test the concept of SHC once and for all in his laboratory to see whether or not he could explain it conventionally or if the mystery would remain. What what von Liebig did was take some tissue, soak it in alcohol, and ignite it. And when the alcohol burned away, he was still left with a intact tissue sample. And therefore, von Liebig concluded that SHC cannot happen. And because he was a famous scientist in his day, had the notoriety in the mid 1800s that Einstein has
Mm-hmm.
in our current existence, his conclusions stuck. And since that time, from now more than almost 150 years, if not more, mainstream fire science and medicine has accepted his conclusion that SHC is an impossibility. It does not happen. No good can be served by discussing it. The only people who advance that it is still possible are people like ourselves, pseudoscientists, who are mystery mongers. We will refute that. The evidence that we have amassed in investigating not only the Reeser case, but hundreds of others like her, puts the lie to the contention and the belief pattern that SHC is impossible. There is a true bona fide medical and scientific mystery here in these amazing cases, and we can go into detail and explain why with the Reeser case or with the Dr. Bentley case or many others that we've documented
Right,
in our
because this
studies.
is something you sent me was, which is, I guess, from what you got from. So in other words, even though the investigators of that day called it that, they couldn't explain it. This gentleman is saying that's impossible, is what you're saying. That doesn't happen.
Yeah,
As
we
far
could fill
as
up the rest of this hour on talking to your guests, quoting expert after expert after expert
mm-hmm.
who, in their hubris, says that the phenomenon of SHC is an impossibility, a medical impossibility, a biological impossibility. There's no way to explain it because there's no way that the body can generate this amount of energy or heat within itself to action itself more completely than can be done in a crematorium retort under normal operating conditions. And
Okay.
Mrs. Weiser in 1951 in your state of Florida is a prime example of what the body can do to itself, even though the experts say it can't happen.
So, and this he just out of curiosity, he came to this conclusion under just one experiment. That was it. One.
To the best
One.
of our knowledge, yeah, he did the experiment once. We've done the same experiment 3 times, always with the same result that von Liebig got. We
Mm-hmm.
in one case that we did for the BBC network in Britain, we had marinated a sample of tissue with a bone. It was a ham shank with bone included. Marinated that in a blend of whiskey, brandy, and vodka for a year. Took it out, wrapped it
Okay.
in cotton, lit it, and with an infinite amount of oxygen supplied to the sample. After an hour, the fire that was fueled by the alcohol went out, and we had a sample of tissue 99% still intact. It was not burned to ash. The significance of saying that is that when a cadaver is put in a crematorium retort at temperatures
Right.
of 22 to 2400 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour to 2 hours, perhaps, what comes out of the retort is not powder, but bone fragments. Bone fragments are put on a cremulator, fancy name for a bone grinder, um, so that the bone fragments are reduced quite literally to powder, mechanically reduced to powder, not by the fire that is put in there
Right.
and
That's
given
what I
the next
understood
hit.
that
Right.
you know how sometimes you hear of criminals trying to burn a body of evidence, and that's quite difficult because there's
It
always
is quite
something left.
difficult. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
you're very knowledgeable in this, Marlene. Um, in fact, we just looked at a case recently from Illinois where a person was burned quite severely in a structure fire. The victim was burned so badly that the fire chief was quite made uncomfortable by trying to describe how badly the victim had been burned. And yet enough of the body was able to be pulled out of the structure fire, taken to a morgue, autopsied, and the criminalists could find evidence of not only foul play, but foul play done by two separate individuals.
Wow.
Enough of the body sample was left to enable that determination to be made. In cases like Mrs. Weiser and others that we'll probably be talking about with you shortly, there was not enough of a body left to for any competent criminologist to make such a determination. Mary Reeser, in the evening of July 1st, 1951, was a rather rotund 175-pound woman,
Okay.
seen by her son, who was a physician, the evening of July 1, about 9 p.m. that evening, sitting in her chair, wearing her accustomed rayon acetate night robe, with two satin slippers on her feet, legs outstretched. She probably took 2 second old sleeping tablets to help her go to sleep. The following morning, less than 12 hours later, when a telegram was to be delivered to her, the landlady, Pansy Carpenter, found that the doorway to, or the door handle to Mrs. Reese's apartment was hot to the touch. She screamed, which alerted two painters across the street. They rushed over, broke the door down, and at that point, they witnessed for the first time a scene that later Dr. Wilton Krogman, a renowned forensic anthropologist, would describe as macabre beyond words.
Okay.
What you're seeing here, what you're showing to your audience, are two firefighters from
Yes.
the St. Pete Fire Department shoveling up the ashes of Mrs. Reeser. Overnight, her body had been reduced from 175 pounds to about 8 pounds of ash and rubble. That included the remains of the chair in which she was known to be seated and an adjoining side table. To do
And
this kind
and
of
and that
damage
was
to
it. That
equipment,
was that. Nothing else. Like that was all that was burnt.
that
Considering,
that was
if
pretty much all that was burned in her apartment. A pair of candles about 12 feet away had melted down. There was
mm-hmm.
blackening by apparent soot at an elevation 4 feet above the floor and up into the ceiling, but no other significant fire or heat damage in her apartment. No odor of burned flesh, again, atypical,
Right, I
but
was gonna ask that. I goes,
yeah,
nobody smelled like, hey, what? Like, that smells like flesh burning, or
yeah, yeah. In a normal fatal fire, the odor of burned human tissue, we have been told again and again, is quite noxious and
yes,
extremely difficult to rid from the environment.
yes.
Not the case with Mrs. Reeser, and not the case in what history would define as classic spontaneous human combustion. This case took an interest by Dr. Wilton Krogman, who was a renowned forensic anthropologist back in the 40s and 50s. He had been vacationing just south of St. Pete when Mrs. Reeser burned herself down, not up, but down.
Right,
He
because what
examined
was
the
left
case
was the legs, right?
and
Mostly.
actually just her foot. The
Oh,
official description, for Mrs. Reese's remains is this: one foot intact with a satin slipper, a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, and a head that was said at the time to have shrunken to the size of a baseball or teacup. Now, human heads don't do that in a fierce fire; they explode. If that description is accurate, this raises all kinds of quandaries and mysteries about how one woman could burn herself so completely, more thoroughly than, as we said earlier, a crematorium retort can accomplish. And yet, clearly in her apartment, there was no evidence of temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, Dr. Krogman wrote that he had conducted several experiments on the effects of fire on cadavers, and he told us that only when the temperature was at 3000 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 uninterrupted hours would he be able to produce an incineration scene as complete, as thorough, and as destructive as what Mrs. Reeser left in her apartment the morning of July 2, 1951. Quite astonishing.
that's, and you know what? That reminds me. That they have, well, not so much, but before they used to have in South America and Central America, some of the tribes that used to do the shrunken heads, or what they call
Hmm.
santas, and they described that to get that, like what you were talking about, what they get the shrunken head, of course, it's a process that's not easily done. What you just described, as far as there's a process that they do, obviously, and part of it is the heat and stuff. But that's incredible that her head had shrunken down like that.
If
It's
the report is accurate, it is absolutely incredible. And even if that report about her shrunken head is inaccurate, we still have the overwhelming scene itself that just defies common sense. And her case is not unique. Some of our critics have called us a mystery monger, that we're making up these stories. This
Right.
is our file on Mary Reeser. This is one case. Now, if we're a mystery monger, we're not going to create a file this thick. This contains the photographs, the
Let me ask you,
FBI
she wasn't,
file.
because I'm gonna think of, I'm gonna interrupt you. Was she a smoker? And any did they throw any of the usual excuses? She fell asleep with a
Yeah,
cigarette in her hand or something like that? No?
yeah. Mary Reeser was a known smoker,
Okay.
and she took, as we said, 2 Seconal tablets that evening before she was discovered to help her sleep. So the argument went initially that yes, she's
Okay.
a smoker. She fell asleep. She dropped a cigarette on her lap, and poof! Over several hours, a low temperature smoldering fire consumed her body to powder. Unfortunately
Wow.
for that rational explanation, the officials at the time could not buy that. They were absolutely bumfuddled. They said that the police
Yes.
chief, let's see if we can find the quote here. Yeah, Police Chief Jake Reichert said the Reeser case, quote, is the most unusual case I've seen in my almost 25 years of police work, end quote. The members of the St. Pete Fire Department were saying basically the same thing. You showed a photo of two firefighters shoveling up her ashes in her apartment. We have
Yes.
spoken to Nelson Aders, one of those two firefighters. He told us that in his professional experience, he had never before or after Mrs. Reese's death encountered in his firefighting career in St. Pete anything that resembled this particular individual fire scene. He told us that in his professional firefighting experience, she had died by spontaneous human combustion. The other firefighter who is stooped over is Buddy Standish. We did not have the opportunity to interview him, but we did meet last August down in St. Pete, his son. And his
Okay.
son told us that his father was really reluctant to talk about this case, but again and again, when he did, he used the word bizarre, which would
Okay.
certainly be appropriate.
Sure. I can imagine
In
it was like, how do you make head or tails of this?
Yeah, in time, it was determined. In fact, when we, as we were pursuing our research in the Reeser case, we corresponded again and again with the same police, fire, and police departments. In 1995, this case was still an open investigation. So 45
Really?
years later, it was still an open case, which is extraordinary. Now, quite recently, we were told that they have closed the case and it's been written off, closed case. In time, it was determined that yes, Mrs. Reeser indeed dropped a cigarette on her lap and slowly smoldered to powder. We have tried that experiment, as we said, we cannot get it to work that way. We have spoken to dozens of crematorium owners. Not one of them has ever told us that in their professional careers as cremationists could they ever reduce a cadaver to the extent that Mrs. Reeser was found.
What did her son, did he ever say something what his opinion was that had happened to his mother?
Yes, he did. Dr. Reeser, we tried desperately several times to meet with him. Initially, he refused to discuss the case with us, and psychologically, that's understandable. To
Sure.
claim that you have a next of kin who died by something as bizarre and mysterious as spontaneous human combustion puts up some mental barriers.
Mhm.
He at one point did agree to speak with us, and then his wife stifled that opportunity for us. His contention is that yes, she dropped a cigarette on her lap and sadly and unfortunately smoldered to death. Um, if any of our naysayers can replicate this fire scene by doing that, we're going to be surprised at this point because, as we said, we've been unable to do it. No crematorium operator has told us that he or she has been able to do this.
The reason why I ask this is this just I'm going on that, that tangent. And maybe and he wouldn't maybe did she ever have incidents in her during her lifetime where fires get started? I'm thinking of the fire starter kind of
Mhm.
mentality, you
No,
know?
no, no. Yeah, we know where you're going, Marlene. To our knowledge,
Mhm.
no. We have been able to interview some of her next of kin, her relatives. No family member ever
And
mentioned anything like
I'm not
that.
talking setting. I'm not talking arson. What I'm talking about
Yeah.
is where fires would start
Hmm.
like that out
Yeah.
of nowhere. Okay.
Like in Stephen King's Firestarter.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there are cases in history very much like that. We mentioned a few in our book ABLAZE. We have a whole perspective book in the works that are focused specifically on poltergeist type fires. But again, we know of no evidence that would connect Mrs. Reeser to that
Okay.
specific type of pyro phenomena.
Right. Yeah. And again, there's doubt. It's doubtful. Maybe even her son would. say, well, yeah, my mom told me that every once in a while stuff would start
Yeah.
smoldering in her room when she was a kid. Who knows? You know. But I'm always curious as far as maybe is it kinetic? Or how did yeah. But anyway, I'm going to ask you about that later on. So here you are, you did an investigation into this as far as looking at it. And let me ask you, why was this gentleman that did that one experiment, why was his word so finite? How's that? As far as
Yeah. His reputation in 1850 in the scientific community in Europe was sterling. If
okay.
Baron von Liebig said something, everybody just by default accepted his word
Okay.
as
All right.
bona
I see
fide.
what you're going with that.
And he had the reputation, and when he spoke, that was the end of the issue. Whatever he decreed
Mhm.
was accepted as scientific fact. Unfortunately, 150 plus years later, his mistake remains. There is nothing to criticize about his experiment. As we said, we've done it ourselves with the same result. Our
Mhm.
contention is that he simply used the wrong fuel and invoked the wrong hypothesis to reach his conclusion. As an example, um, if we put a gallon of water in the gas
Mhm.
tank of our DeLorean and turn the ignition key, that DeLorean is going to go nowhere. If we
Okay.
put a gallon of 92 octane gasoline in the fuel tank and turn the ignition key, we're going to take that DeLorean down the street.
Okay.
What von Liebig did was use the wrong fuel. We submit.
Okay.
He used alcohol and soaked the meat tissue in that base of alcohol. Once the alcohol burned off, there was no fuel left for the fire to continue burning into the meat tissue. So he was left with an intact sample, which is what happened in the 3 experiments that we have done over the years. Um, Choose a different fuel, and you might got a very different result that would have resembled what happened to Mrs. Reeser or Dr. Bentley, which we would love to talk about next.
Okay. So in other words, what you're saying is his premise was that it was from the beginning, the experiment, just the way it was set up, like you said, the hypothesis, and of course the result that it got, whatever his hypothesis was, proved to be true or inaccurate. I don't know what his original hypothesis was, but it sounds like it was like, no, bodies don't burn this way. So I know that you said that there was history of other times where people have done the same thing.
Yes, before and after the Reeser case. As we said, we can trace this phenomenon medically back to the 1500s. We can go
Okay.
farther back into history by looking at mythology and legends from Greek and Roman times. We can
Really?
also bring the phenomenon much more recently than that. In 1975, we got wind of another case that had Pennsylvania connections. Our home state is Pennsylvania. Mrs. Reese, who grew up in Lancaster County, had moved temporarily down to Florida where she met her flaming fate, but she was planning to move back to Pennsylvania. She did so, but in, in a box of ashes, not as she intended to do so.
Right.
In 1975, we got tipped off to a case that sounded remarkably like what happened to Mrs. Reeser, again, here in our home state of Pennsylvania. It had enough hallmarks that seemed to duplicate what happened to Mary Reeser that we took an interest in it. We made some phone calls, spoke to some first responders, spoke to the coroner, the deputy coroner, and decided that we needed to look deeper into the case of the death of Dr. John Irving Bentley here in Pennsylvania that happened in December
Okay.
of 1966. We learned about it 9 years later. What we discovered in
Okay.
pursuing the case of Dr. Bentley was that he burned up very much like Mrs. Reeser did, perhaps even more completely, more dramatically than the ashes that Mrs. Reeser left behind. Dr. Bentley's story, very succinctly, is this. Uh, the evening of December 4, 1966, a Sunday night, he was visited by his caretakers in Coudersport, northern Pennsylvania. Apparently in good health, quite astute. And when they bid him a good night, the following morning, he was expected to be visited by the local gas meter reader, Don Gosnell. When Mr. Gosnell showed up at Dr. Bentley's home the morning of December 5, 1966, to read the meter in the basement, Mr. Gosnell discovered in the basement floor, after he read the gas meter, was a pile of ashes 5 inches in height, 14 inches in diameter. Mr. Gosnell was also a volunteer fireman in Countersport. He walked over, kicked the
Okay.
mound of ashes on the earthen floor with his boot, and wondered what had burned, because the
Oh
last time
boy.
he was down in the basement, this pile of
Yes.
powder wasn't there. Mr. Gosnell looked overhead to see if that had been the source of the fire or the pile of ashes, and noticed in the basement ceiling a hole in the basement ceiling about 2.5 by 3 feet in size. There were some cherry embers around the perimeter of that hole, and Gosnell told us that he thought to himself, gee, there must have been a fire here in Dr. Bentley's house overnight or quite recently. I wonder why the fire department, myself included, didn't get a call to come out and put it out. This is an early picture of Dr. Bentley when he was in better health in his younger years and looking very good and dashing and debonair.
Right, right, yeah. You could tell
He
he
was
was
a
born in
he was
74, yeah.
Yeah, he was a country physician. The people in Countersport just loved this guy. He had a sterling
Mhm.
reputation. He was beloved by everybody we spoke to who knew the gentleman. The morning of December 5, 1966, after Don Gosnell noticed a pile of powder on the earthen floor in the basement, he went back upstairs, but before leaving Dr. Bentley's home, he wanted to knock on the door to make sure that Doc Bentley was alive and well. Knocked on the door, got no response. Mr. Gosnell walked into the apartment. It was a two-room apartment, a sitting bedroom, and an adjoining bathroom. Gosnell did not find Dr. Bentley in the sitting room, stepped deeper into the apartment, peered into the bathroom, and saw, I'm sure you'll pull up the photograph next, what has become the poster child for classic spontaneous human combustion. Overnight, Dr. John Irving Bentley reduced himself, who weighed about 180 pounds the night before, to a few pounds of basically powder and one leg and a kneecap.
And this
The
is
rest
when
of
I
the
guess this
body,
gentleman must have thought, let me see if I could, I'm going here through the, I'm like, I can imagine this gentleman that discovered him that you said was a volunteer fireman.
yeah,
He must
volunteer
have
firefighter.
been firefighter. He must have been, I don't know. I'm trying to think what he was thinking. He must have been like, no, this doesn't work. This doesn't happen this way.
No, it doesn't.
Let me
He
see.
he
Let
he
me.
left he left the home. This is we're holding up a photo. There you got it. This is
Mhm.
Dr. Bentley in the morning of December 5, 1966. Half of one leg, a few pieces of well, the one bone fragment that was identified at the scene was his patella. It was found on a post in the basement. And under the aluminum walker was a round overhead mass that we believe is Dr. Bentley's skull, burned so badly that some of the first responders could not recognize it as a human head. We were at this fire scene. We were attest to the validity, the historical validity of this photograph. We know the photographer who took it and gave us this photograph. This is not
Okay.
Photoshop. This is not AI created. Again, this photograph was taken on the Monday of December 5, 1966, long before Photoshop and AI existed.
Yes.
As Don Gosnell said, he ran out of the house down to his work office, ran into the building. His coworkers told us that his face was white as a ghost, and all Don could spurt out to them was this quote: "Dr. Bentley's burned up." In our view,
Right.
probably arguably the understatement of 1966, because Doc Bentley indeed had burned up, or more precisely, burned down. He burned almost completely through three oaken beams in the floorboards below the bathroom flooring.
What?
The floor material in the bathroom itself was tar-based linoleum, highly flammable material. The bathtub that you can see in the upper part of the photograph,
Uh-huh.
the blackened area is from soot from the combustion. The bathtub was painted with enamel paint. You would expect the paint to have blistered. It did
That-
not blister. As we said, we stood in the bathroom where this event happened. We stand 6 feet tall with our arm outstretched. We can touch the ceiling. There was not a scorch mark, not a heat mark directly above the hole on this, through which Dr. Bentley immolated downward. As in the Reeser case, there was the absence of noxious burned tissue, smell.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Don Gosnell's first reaction when he walked into the hallway to get to the meter in the basement was that there was a sweet, odd aroma in the hallway of Dr. Bentley's home. Dr. Bentley's home was built in the 1800s. It was a highly combustible environment.
Okay. All right. I
The
believe
entire
that.
structure to create this kind of damage by fire to a human body should require the
Mm-hmm.
entire structure to have burned to the ground, and even then, you will not find a body burned this completely. As we said with the case from Ireland, from Illinois a couple of years ago, the body could be removed, taken to a morgue, autopsied, and evidence found of murder, arson, crime. You would not find a stab wound, a gunshot wound in Dr. Bentley's ashes. That is how completely burned was his
Right.
body.
There was no nick on a bone that you could say, well, that's where the
Now,
and apparently he did the same thing. What was left was the legs. The ending of the legs is what's left
one
behind.
leg in this case, yes, there's half of one leg. That is his legacy to the world, if you will. Dr. Bentley had broken his hip about 15 years earlier, so he used that aluminum walker to locomote through his
Mm-hmm.
two-room apartment. The skeptics say that Dr. Bentley dropped a match or his pipe on his lap and was rushing to the bathroom in search of water to put out his burning bathrobe and just didn't quite succeed in the task. Problem upon problem upon problem upon problem with that scenario that explain away. First, Dr. Bentley was a known pipe smoker, but his pipe was found neatly placed in a pipe holder on a stand next to the chair. If Dr.
Okay.
Bentley had dropped a lit pipe or a lit match on his lap and awakened, he was keen of mind. He was slow of body, but keen of mind. As a physician, he would have known the first thing you do is drop and roll, get out of your burning
Right.
garment. If his garment was ablaze, it took him a full 5 minutes to hobble with his walker from his sitting chair in the living room
Uh-huh.
to the bathroom where he would have had a source of water. He would not have survived a 5 minute trek with his walker to get to the bathroom and then burned to the extent that he did. A
Yes.
bathrobe does not provide sufficient fuel loading to incinerate a body to this extent. Dr. Bentley's aluminum walker is clearly intact directly above
Yes,
the hole
yes.
through which his body emulated. Aluminum will melt at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. It is clearly intact. So we're looking at a temperature that had to be below 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's half the temperature that a crematorium retort operates at. As we said, no heat damage to the ceiling. The enamel
It's
pane
almost
of
like
the
it's
bathtub
contained in a
inches away.
very narrow area, which is like
Excellent.
incredible because how do
Very
you
good
contain
observation. Yep.
and I'm gonna
Yeah.
interject something. I have big burn piles. I have big trees I've brought down.
How do you contain it?
And well, my thing
Okay.
is that even this is a tree. This is sometimes, especially when you have bigger, bigger. As a matter of fact, I have big trunks out there. I had some very old oaks that came down. You can't burn them. I'm going to have to do a second round of burning them. And this is wood. Okay. My point being, what you were saying, as far as to
Mm-hmm.
be able to cremate a body to down to ashes in what hours between the time they were last seen to when they're discovered. That's difficult. That's and fire. I mean, a lot of people think sometimes fires sometimes will take off if the setting is right, but there's other times that I know because I'd start fire all the times because I burn a lot of stuff here on my property. It's not as easy as one thinks to keep a fire
Mm-hmm.
going, especially inside. Where when the wind blows. You know how you see people blow to get a fire going. That's usually one of the things. But I'm thinking, let's say this is
Sure.
inside a building. There's
Mm-hmm.
no fanning of the flames. In other words, okay,
I,
and then it's
doc, doc,
contained in
doc,
this
doc,
little
doc,
area.
yeah.
That's
Yep.
incredible.
Dr. Bentley burned up in December. It's cold, very cold in northern Pennsylvania in December. So he did not have windows open. There was no cross
Right.
ventilation. Um, it was not an airtight structure, but you had the oxygen and air in the building, and that was basically it. Um, the oaken
That's my
beams. One of
point.
those oaken beams is yeah. One of the oaken
That
beams is
that people
almost burned
don't burn up
completely
that
through.
easily. I guess is my point.
No,
As people
no, they
as
don't.
easily as people think, they don't. Under normal circumstances, how's that? Well, you just described that if it was accidental and something like a match or something fell, it's not like it's gonna fall and you go and you burst into flame unless you're doused with accelerant. But even then, so what you were saying that if it was an accidental whatever match fell on him or something, he could
There,
have
there's
put it
no,
out.
yeah, there's in both of these cases, there is no evidence of foul play. There is no accelerant having been involved.
Uh-huh.
Um, there is no provable external ignition source linked to either body. Um, so therein lies a mystery. We have looked at cases involving massive amounts of accelerant. One that comes immediately to
Yes.
mind happened on the Schuylkill Expressway outside of Philadelphia several years ago, where a motorist unfortunately collided with a gasoline tanker truck. The, the,
Wow.
the tanker exploded. 8,000 gallons of gasoline was aflame. The temperature was
Whoa.
so hot that it buckled the rebar in the concrete of the Schuylkill Expressway. And
Wow.
yet, the victim in the car could be extricated from the vehicle after the fire was extinguished and could be identified based on on dental records. That is how
Mm-hmm.
difficult it can be to burn a body. Clearly, conditions like that were not present in Mary Reese's apartment. Clearly not present in Dr. Bentley's home in Coudersport in 1966. So the
Is there
lack
a
of
history that these victims live alone? Or like I guess what I'm going with this is there do they ever live with somebody where somebody's in another room
are you going to
and
love
come
the answer to this? Back in the 1700s and up until von Liebig did his experiment in the mid 1800s, this was a fiercely and hotly debated subject within the European medical community, with some very interesting caveats. It was said that all victims of this alleged phenomenon were elderly, female, alcoholics who were sedentary, overweight, and lived alone. Our research debunks every one of those aspects. By gender, 50% of our database are female, 47% are male. History doesn't tell us the gender of the remaining 3%. So by gender, by sex, about 50-50, close enough.
Okay.
Um, some victims are certainly elderly. Um,
Mhm.
most of them are elderly, and we would expect that because as the body ages, biological processes tend to break the body down. That's not a surprise. The youngest victim in our database currently is probably a 6-week-old toddler in a crib. We have
What?
children to whom this happens. Some of the victims do live alone. Others burn up in the proximity of next of kin. We actually have a case from Vitry, France in 1731, where two females were sleeping in a bed together. One of the females awakened to discover, much no doubt to her horror, a real true life nightmare, that her companion had burned to powder in the bed overnight as they slept beside one another.
My God. That's incredible. It's like and I guess that thing also about the toddler. You know, I've never heard of that. And let me ask you, and I'm sure because it sounds like you've looked at all these different cases, whether, how age and, have you found a common denominator among the cases?
We have certainly looked for common denominators, common
Mhm.
traits that all these victims would share. It would make explaining the phenomenon so much easier. We have not been able to do that. And it
Okay.
certainly has not been for absence of trying to do so.
Okay.
We've attempted to look at psychological profiles of the victims, looking for
Mhm.
common factors. Are they all type A personalities? We just can't get that information. And not surprisingly, fire departments tend not to even look at that kind of information
Sure.
when they're filing their post-fire reports. Do they all have the same diet? No. Dr. Bentley, we were told, for the last 3 years of his life, subsisted on a diet of shredded wheat and coffee.
Oh my God.
We've chuckled sometimes that maybe the body
Yeah.
just got tired of shredded wheat and coffee and decided we're going to do something
And
else about
even
this
then,
guy.
I don't see how that I don't know. I don't get
Yeah.
it. Like, what you're ingesting into how could that make you like poof? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, from what you're telling me, there is nothing that you can say, you know what, we found this and this and this, even though they're very dissimilar in circumstances and sex and whatever. There's this one thing that we have found across the board.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes you don't know everything about everybody, especially these people, if it was maybe hundreds of years or decades ago. So, all right. I mean, like, hey, don't do this or don't be there. As far as the something, what's the word I'm looking for? Something that is the catalyst or
Yeah.
the nexus for people bursting into flame.
We wish we could find it. It would make our job so much easier, which is the reason that we've been unsuccessful in finding any commonality to the hundreds
Mm-hmm.
of cases that we've collected over the decades of our life looking into this phenomenon is that there likely is not a single explanation, which is why in our book ABLAZE we look at, consider, and offer for consideration about 120 different theories. You can throw
Okay.
them all out, you can accept all of them, or you can give us 5 more theories. We don't care. The mystery remains. The solution to this fiery phenomenon is yet to be found.
And how about location, geography, anything like that? No, no.
Now, location is offering the one possible common factor to many of these cases. We have more cases per capita of the phenomenon of SHC in the United Kingdom than in any other part of the planet.
Really?
With a fairly
Okay.
large database, we were looking for patterns. What we did in 1975 was to plot all the cases that we had in our files at that time of spontaneous human and spontaneous property combustions on a map.
Uh-huh.
And then we
Okay.
looked for patterns. What we discovered is what we now call fire lanes, the alignment of unusual fires. We found that these mysterious, baffling blazes could be connected by straight alignments linking 3, 4, 5, and in one case that roughly parallels the east coast of the United Kingdom from southeast England up into the Scottish Highlands, may connect as many as a dozen cases of anomalous fires. Statistically, that is incredibly significant and deserves further study. It certainly
That
raises some very interesting issues for the actuarial industry and the insurance
I
industry.
bet. I bet.
If you're at
That
the
is
right
incredible.
place but the
Yeah, I
wrong
see
time,
that.
you or your house may become an incendiary hazard to your house or your property. If the test of a theory is that does it lead you to new discoveries, then the concept
Mhm.
of the alignment of fire lanes has been proven to our satisfaction, because what we did after we plotted this map that you're showing to your listeners and to your audience now in
Mhm.
1975 was to do another research trip to the United Kingdom in 1977. When we went up to the where that bevy of combustions is plotted on the east coast of England, that's up in the Lincolnshire area. We had a number of unusual fires and other types of Fortean phenomena occurring in that area, particularly back in 1905 and 1908. Might there be some more recent fires that we did not know about if we went to that area and spoke to the officials? What we did was meet with the fire brigade commander for Lincolnshire, sat down in his office, introduced ourselves, explained why we were there, and did he have any unusual fires in his jurisdiction that he could tell us about. His first reaction was, "No, what you're talking about, Larry, doesn't happen." But then he got really quiet, very pensive, and thought. And he comes back and he
Uh-huh.
says, "Well, a couple years ago, Larry, we had this really weird fire out in Crookley on Bain. The neighbors of the gentleman, who lived in a tinderbox of an environment, told us that they hadn't seen him in a couple of days. Please come out and see if he's okay." They went into the house, couldn't find him. The neighbors insisted that he had to be somewhere inside his tar paper of a shack environment. Firefighters went back in and discovered that they had been walking through his ashes that
Oh.
were lying between stacks of newspaper that themselves had not
Oh.
burned. The other example
Wow.
of that was in 1980, we heard about a similar case that happened to a gentleman named Henry Thomas over in Wales in a place called Ibervale. We had no idea where Ibervale was, but we got this map out. and traced the lines that the alignment of fires that go through Wales. And guess what? One of those alignments went right through Iberville. Henry Thomas burned up in a localized fire in his apartment in a way that's duplicated what happened to Mary Weezer and to Dr. Bentley. So it looks to us like the alignment of these strange fires has a great deal of merit and certainly is worthy of further pursuit. It's kind of analogous to the alignment of megalithic structures, Stonehenge, Avebury,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. But in that case, where the energies supposedly affect either the environment or the consciousness of the person who is on those telluric energy patterns. In the case of the fire lanes, we're dealing with a different type of energy vibration, which produces combustion fire phenomena.
Have you have this has this happened to animals?
It has. We document a few cases in the book
I thought you were going to tell me no, Marlene. What are you
where
talking about?
spontaneous animal combustion has happened to cats, dogs, sheep,
Really?
cattle. Yeah. So
That's
factor
that
that
they
in.
this and it's the same process where this animal for no reason just and then has it been witnessed? Like I can't imagine that. That's got to be like what?
Oh, that's a wonderful question to raise because the debunkers, the naysayers of SHG, just hate what we're going to tell you now.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
the phenomenon has been witnessed. Most
Okay.
often, what the witnesses report historically is seeing the victim engulfed in a bright electric blue flame, in air quotes,
Ah.
a light. Now, this tells us if the that the process is not an oxidizing type of combustion fire. It's electrical or plasma or
Uh-huh.
subatomic or something other than what happens when you strike a match or light a
Yes.
gas stove burner. We do have reports of copper red fire or flame, silver, argent, blue green, but most often, predominantly, the historical record says that when this phenomenon is observed, it's a bright electric blue light that engulfs the individual.
And it's very quick. Is this something like a very
Very quick.
very
Yeah,
quick? That's what I
very
was
quick.
thinking. That it's just this moment of like extreme and then maybe that's why things around it don't get
Mhm.
singed in some cases.
We believe so. Yeah, whatever this energy is, it has either a very low thermal component, or if it is high heat, it is so fast that surrounding combustibles, paint, paper, linen, is not impacted by that heat. It's a
Nothing like
flash
static,
fire.
no static. You know how when people, I'm going to ask this,
Mhm.
like when you get that static charge, nothing like that, right? I mean, considering,
Well, it could be something like that. We do have cases. Again, when we began our research, well, when we were going up through high school in the 50s and 60s, ball lightning was considered to be a myth, a fable. Now, ball lightning is accepted by mainstream science, and indeed, it can be created in laboratories. We do have some cases where it appears that ball lightning or some other phenomenon in nature, very much like ball lightning, is the external causative mechanism that causes some people's bodies to smoke or blister or to burn
okay,
spontaneously. So, in some of the cases, we do have an explanation. But
right.
again, if you had not seen the fireball striking the person's hand, um,
Hmm.
you'd end up with simply a spontaneous burn with no explanation, no understanding of
But
what
it's only
external
like
factor caused it.
localized. In other words,
It's
it's not like,
localized. Yeah.
right.
It's not, so far, we don't know of a fireball creating a whole body human incineration event. That's correct.
I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, and so, some of these things I understand are well impossible. Because you would have to be able to speak to these people that were incinerated, like asking them, "Did you feel something weird that day, or was there something?" Did you feel like was there? Did you feel hot? But you can't go back in time, and it's impossible. As
That
far
that
as it's like lucky you, it's your turn. You're gone.
that recalls a funny story. Years ago, the David Letterman program contacted us. Would we be willing to come
Okay.
on and talk with David Letterman about this phenomenon? We said, sure, that'll be fun. We can kick around, have some great time, and get some useful information out to the public through David's show. we're all ready to do this. And the producer comes back and says, but we need you to provide somebody who will spontaneously combust on camera.
It's like,
Well,
what?
no, we can't quite do that. So, end of opportunity. Um,
Okay, but that's kind of like, all right, does he understand that what you're asking basically, okay, you wanna wig out your audience? Yeah, let's let's show
yeah,
somebody. No,
that would
that's
be the ultimate stupid human trick for
yeah,
David Letterman.
exactly, exactly,
Obviously, we could
exactly.
not meet the criteria, the qualifications, so that at that point fell through.
Yeah.
Um,
Man, let me
but it
tell you
also
something. That would
shows, we
be a
guess,
one
how some people,
unforgettable
yeah.
late night show. It'd be like, what?
Whether they really understood what they were asking us to do, it wasn't clear. What we do say is we've tried to be very careful and diligent and meticulous and methodical in the research that we do in this phenomenon. It is incredibly easy to just blow it off as happenstance,
Yes.
as mystery mongering.
Mm-hmm.
We showed you the file that we have in Mrs. Reeser. We have spoken to, we don't know how many first responders at these fire scenes around the
Right.
world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we've collected probably the largest number of photographic documentation of this phenomenon. The
Okay.
photographs are real historical documents that prove this phenomenon is a reality that deserves serious consideration by mainstream science. We have caught our critics lying in public about their success in proving, let's say, the Wick theory, which is what is most often promulgated to explain away the mystery of these cases. John DeHaan, we have no hesitation anymore bringing out names. John DeHaan, until his death in 2022, was this country's leading fire expert.
Okay.
He continually persisted and argued with us that SHC doesn't happen, that all these people are victims of dropped cigarettes or carelessly placed pipes, that
Okay.
once the clothing is externally ignited,
Here
they
we go.
become a human candle, the wick effect. This is John DeHaan.
Right.
So there's no mystery as far as Mr. DeHaan is concerned. John did 4 experiments televised that we know of. The first one was done for the BBC, and before the producer left us to film John doing his experiment in California, we told the producer, if John succeeds in doing what he claims he's going to do for you, we'll be impressed and it will be medically significant, but he cannot use an accelerant. When the
Okay.
experiment is aired on BBC, what do we see and what does the viewer see? It sees John DeHaan pouring a liter of gasoline on a pig. Bad
That's
experiment.
an accelerant.
Bad experimental methodology. That's an accelerant. Thank you.
Yeah.
None of our cases involve an accelerant. Okay. John did 3 other experiments after that. 2 of them produced fires that had to be extinguished
Okay.
using pigs as the stand-in for a human body. That's a fair stand-in. We don't argue that. The
Mm-hmm.
experiment that you're showing now aired on the Learning Channel in 2003 in a program called Spontaneous Combustion. We were on that program. John DeHaan was part of that program. In this experiment that John is beginning to conduct, he took 12 candles, a fistful of candles
Okay.
to represent a human body. He wrapped them in cloth, laid them on a chair, and lit them. Now, our first critique of this is, does anyone really believe that a fistful of wax candles is a true representation of the human body? We would argue, no, it is not. But this is a world-renowned forensic fire expert in a lab coat telling you that he's doing what needs to be done to disprove SHC.
Is this was that the candle that the one that I just put
This is
onto the
the
human
human
candle wick
candle wick
theory?
theory, right? You take an external
Okay.
ignition source, in this case, a barbecue grill igniter, or a match,
Mm-hmm.
or a Bunsen burner, or a cigarette. Ideally, you add some alcohol to the human body, and you're going to end up with Mrs. Reeser's single foot and a few pieces of calcined vertebrae. That's the argument for the human candle wick theory.
Okay.
In the experiment that you're showing now to your listeners, at the end of the experiment, if you're watching this on TLC, John DeHaan is standing outside the burn chamber saying, look, localized chair in the fire had gone out. You've got a localized fire, no surrounding combustible damage. Ergo, I have just proven that SHC doesn't happen. End of mystery. What TLC did not show, but what we know to be absolute incontrovertible fact is this. Between the picture of John DeHaan igniting the fistful of candles on the chair and John DeHaan standing outside the burn chamber saying, "Look, localized fire put itself out, no mystery," what actually happened is that the burn chamber was within seconds of full room flashover. The chair was a
Oh,
roaring inferno. John
okay.
DeHaan knew this, and yet he stood there at the end of his experiment and lied to the viewing audience. If you have to
Okay.
lie about the failure of your experiment by calling it a success, what is your merit as a scientist to begin with? And you have no
Right.
credibility whatsoever to say
Absolutely
that the
not.
research that we have done has no merit itself.
Exactly. And this is the
We've
thing,
had
because that's a phenomena besides the body basically being burnt to ashes, is that nothing around it per se has been burned.
Precisely.
Very
That is
few.
one of the distinguishing factors of this phenomenon is the localization of what appears to be an incredibly high heat fire and yet
Mhm.
surrounding combustibles that are much more easily burned. They have much lower ignition points than does the human body. Those items escape unsinged or barely touched at all.
And and what came of it? That did you ever go back and say, "Hey," or that was it? It was televised, and hey, this was a successful experiment. So this thing of people just catching fire, that doesn't really exist. In other words,
We
they're
have the video proof of John DeHaan's lie, and for 25 years we annually taught fire science at local community college here in Harrisburg to a
Mhm.
lot of very skeptical fire students until we got to this particular point in our presentation. And the instructor of that course, Don Conkle, who now retired as Harrisburg's fire chief, was absolutely blown away. Up up to that point, he had used Mr. DeHaan's textbook in his
Oh,
for his fire
wow.
students.
Okay.
Mr. Conkle decided at that point he could not trust John DeHaan and removed the book from the curriculum and replaced it with a different author's textbook. Uh, we can honestly say that the firefighters themselves, the students to whom we showed this information, were themselves taken aback. Um, for someone of Mr. Hahn's reputation and standing in the fire service community to outright lie about the failure of his experiment is frankly beyond our comprehension. But it speaks to the psychology of this phenomenon itself, in that it raises so many profound, deeply disturbing questions to people who think they know everything there is to know about fire behavior and
Right.
fire science, that it is easier for, sadly, many of them to ignore the evidence that we try to present to them and instead either run away from it, which has happened, or lie about it, or fabricate evidence and pass it off as fact, which has also happened. This is being done by people who go on television in lab coats. Um, Seems to be the uniform of authenticity,
Mhm.
or by people who are well known in the scientific skeptical field of inquiry. They are willing to fabricate evidence and pass it off as fact rather than admit to there being a bona fide real life
Well, it's
40s
all about the
mystery to
ego,
explore.
Larry. When your
It is.
ego,
Yeah.
you know what? It wouldn't be the first time that ego gets in the way of real science. How's that? Because
You're so absolutely correct. That reminds us of we had Chinese dinner a couple of weeks ago, and in the fortune cookie that came with the meal was this proverb inside the cookie. Quote, "He who is afraid of asking is ashamed of learning." We thought that was a
yeah,
wonderful
yes,
little thought
absolutely.
that certainly applies to many of the naysayers in the field that we're sharing with your audience this evening. Um, we've had fire inspectors, fire investigators, usher us out of their office after we showed them photographs and asked them to explain from their professional point of view to us as a lay investigator how these
Mm-hmm.
fires can be explained. We've had them run away from us down at the National Fire Academy, the
I
inspectors
bet.
or the instructors. We had one inspector in Philadelphia literally tell us, and we will never forget this quote, if I encountered a fire scene like you're showing me happen to Helen Conway or to Dr. Bentley, what I would do is this: I'd go out, get drunk, and forget about it.
It's like because
He's
I'm the
entitled to do that, but
sure. Yeah.
my God, you shouldn't then be a professional firefighter in the city of brotherly love. Find another profession.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
we're trying to understand this because this to us is a real weird, bizarre, but also incredibly fascinating subject to explore and to try to
Yes.
figure out. At best, we've been able to document it better than we believe anybody else has been able to do. The photographs of Dr. Bentley would never be known to the public had not we doggedly pursued the case. There's a similar case up in upstate New York that happened in 1986 to George Mott, a retired firefighter, meticulously careful about fire in his home, and yet he burned himself to powder lying on his bed. He burned through the mattress, through the floorboards below the bed, into the crawl space below. He too had to have his ashes shoveled out of the crawl space, much as Mrs. Reeser was shoveled out of her apartment.
Let
This
me
is
ask, and I'm sorry, what did this gentleman do for a living?
he was a retired firefighter,
Okay. I'm just
very cautious, very meticulous about anything in
right,
his
right.
in his home that possibly might be a fire hazard. What he
Mm-hmm.
left behind was in this photograph. We have shown this photograph to those students that we taught for 25 years. And in that 25-year period, we think we had one student who could actually identify the body part that George Mott left behind in his bed. The arrows point to it. The upper arrow on the right is pointing to the toes of Mr. Mott's right foreleg.
Oh.
The left arrow is pointing to where the kneecap should be. Mr. Mott left behind in his bed one half of one leg, much as Dr. Bentley left one half of his leg in his bathroom floor. At the other end of the bed was Mr. Mott's head, that we were told by a firefighter who knew Mr. Mott. The head
Mm-hmm.
had shrunken to the size of a grapefruit. Now, where did we hear that before? With the
Yes.
Reeser case.
With the
We
Reeser
have three
case,
cases
yes.
where it has been said that the human head shrank ex- extraordinarily shrank in size. Again, this is not supposed to happen in any conventional fire scene. This is George Mott's cabin home outside of Crown Point, New York, which is outside of
Mm-hmm.
Ticonderoga and upstate eastern New York. Another combustible environment. This whole structure should have been burned down. It was
Right.
not. We stood in Mr. Mott's bedroom again, with being 6 feet in height. We could touch the 7-foot ceiling above Mr. Mott's bed. Not a scorch mark on it.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Again, no odor of burned flesh. So once again, we have either complete absence of noxious burned
Mhm.
human tissue, or a sweet, redolent perfume-like smell. One of
There,
the
in recent
additional
cases, with have they been able to, I guess because now they have better scientific methodology or equipment, have they found anything in more recent cases after they've studied what's left of the person as far as chemical, not I'm not saying accelerant, but any something weird?
We have a case from 2013 in Oklahoma where we have the medical examiner's report. There
Mm-hmm.
is nothing in the report that we recall that would lend any insight or ideas into how that victim burned so completely. In a case
Okay.
from Bolingbrook, which is outside of Chicago, that happened Thanksgiving weekend in 1979 to Beatrice Oski, a fair amount of her body was left intact in her chair. Her lower legs were intact, and there was enough body left that it could be autopsied. Um,
Okay.
the fire chief and the fire marshal both told us that the results of the autopsy was that there was not one drop of blood left in the tissues of Mrs. Oski. when the fire was first discovered, her son told us that the room smelled like hickory incense.
Oh
Um,
boy, that's that's wow,
she
that's
also was a
unusual.
smoker, but once again, we're up with this quandary where if there's an external known ignition source,
Mm-hmm.
how can a body burn so completely in such a short period of time? Aside from the witness cases, the fatal case where we have been able to lock down the time parameter is the case of Mrs. Helen Conway, another Pennsylvania case, and another case that had we not doggedly pursued it would be lost to history. No one would ever know this photograph existed. In
Let me ask you, and
1960,
this again, this is how, just real quick, how did you find out about the case? Was it you just were doing research and all of a sudden you came across it?
here's the Conway. Yeah, this is an interesting story. Glad
Okay.
you asked. Um, we were given opportunity to be, to our knowledge at the time, the only non-firefighter professional who was granted access to attend the advanced arson classes at the Pennsylvania Fire Academy.
Okay.
We were in the classroom, and at the end of the classwork, the instructor, Buzz Trebold, said, "I've just received in the mail a photograph of what some people say is spontaneous human combustion. It's this lady who was burned up in a chair." And our immediate thought was, "Oh, this is the Reeser case. He's just learned about it." So he passed the instructor was passing the
Okay.
photographs around the room, and we're expecting to see the photograph of Mrs. Reeser when it gets to our hands. And we're looking at this photograph that you're showing to your audience, and we're saying,
Uh-huh.
obviously, this is not Mrs. Reeser. There's two legs, whereas Mrs.
Yes.
Reeser left behind 1 foot. Okay. When the class was dismissed, we rushed up to Mr. Trebold, introduced ourselves, and said, "Who, when, where, how, why?" His answer, "All I know is that it happened somewhere in southeastern Pennsylvania." He had no date, he had no name, he had no fire department jurisdiction, only southeastern Pennsylvania. Well, if your audience doesn't know, southeastern Pennsylvania is Philadelphia, the biggest
Okay.
city in Pennsylvania. Millions of people. How do we find this? Several months later, we had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Wilton Krogman, the forensic anthropologist involved in the Reeser fire. Sat down in
Mm-hmm.
his office to talk to him about his career as a forensic anthropologist, and finally to get him to talk about his involvement in the Reeser case, which he was quite reluctant to do. At the end of that interview, he said, "Larry, I just got this envelope, which has a photograph that might be of interest to you." It was the photograph that you're showing your listeners. The envelope had a address on it. We wrote to the address, and a couple weeks later, we heard from the fire marshal for Upper Darby Township, who took this photograph and 11 others. That's how we found out about the Conway case. We sat down with the fire chief, Paul Haggerty, you see in the insert there.
Right.
We sat down with his assistant fire marshal, and then we sat down with Bob Meslin, the fire photographer in 1964, who took the photographs and later became fire marshal for Upper Darby Township. With those three senior fire officials, sitting down with them and going over all the details that they knew about this remarkable fire scene, we can tell you this. From the time that Mrs. Conway was known to be alive in her second floor sitting room at this house in Upper Darby Township on a Sunday morning in November 1964, until the fire department got notification of a fire that they responded to within minutes.
Mm-hmm.
From the time that she was known to be alive until the time that the fire department arrived at a fire scene where there was no fire to extinguish is 360 seconds, six
Wow.
minutes. There is not a fire professional anywhere that we have interviewed and shown this photograph to, and this includes John DeHaan, involved in that
So
phony
you were you
fire
this
experiment.
was
You can explain this.
I I can imagine the fire. I imagine how do these fire departments? How do they like? I know they all write reports on what, especially when it involves somebody dying.
Yeah.
It's like, who wants to sign off on that report?
We love your chuckle, and it's been a source of great frustration as well as amusement for us at times, um, because in the Oskey case from Illinois, we were told that the police department actually tried to sweep the ashes literally under the carpet. It was the fire department that refused to accept that this was an accidental smoking mishap event, and was willing to sit down with us and pursue it at great depth.
So they were open-minded
It's
about it, in
incredible.
other words.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to locate these fires to begin with, as you might imagine. Based on what we've told you has been the response of the Philadelphia fire inspector, for example, this will be written off as a smoking mishap, and the photographs will be buried and never released to the public. And in the certificate of death in Pennsylvania for Dr. Bentley, officially, Dr. Bentley died by asphyxiation. Legally, that
Interesting.
would be defensible in court because that's what the death certificate says. However, to determine asphyxiation, a medical examiner needs a trachea, a throat, a mouth, or lungs. None of those existed for Dr. Bentley, nor did they exist for Mary Reeser, nor did they exist for George Mott. And George Mott's death certificate also says that officially he died by asphyxiation.
I was about to
So
a
even if
that's a
you're able
very
to
good
find a
question. What did they put on that death certificate as the cause of death? Interesting.
cause of death was asphyxiation compounded by attendant fire damage and burning to 90% of the body, is the determination officially for Dr. Bentley's demise. 90% burning of the body? No, as the deputy coroner John Deck told us, it's more like 99%. And again,
Because I always
one of our
thought
one of
of
our
asphyxiation as somebody where they find the body, but the person's dead, and basically they say they were overcome by the smoke, and then they,
Mhm.
they asphyxiated.
Yeah,
But if
yeah,
there's no body, all right.
yeah. You can look at the trachea, you can look at the esophagus and find soot
Mm-hmm.
particles. Okay, they were alive when the fire began, or if there's no soot in the trachea, the person was dead
Exactly.
before the harm.
Exactly.
Simple. Good
Right, which is,
forensics.
by the
Is
way, murder scenes that they try to cover up. That's how they
sure.
determine it. If there's no smoke or anything inside the lungs, they'll say, okay, this person was dead when the fire started, and there goes that theory of they died by asphyxiation.
Precisely. It's simple forensic science. Should work.
Yeah.
But when it comes to this specific subject that we're chatting with you about today,
Mm-hmm.
all that common sense seems to, in most cases, get tossed out, and the blinders go on the eyes. One of our naysayers, Mark Benecki, well-known forensic biologist, says that
Mm-hmm.
SHC cannot happen, does not happen, is impossible because, according to him, there is no known case in which internal organs are burned more completely than our external body parts. On that basis, SHC, he says, cannot happen. That's fine. But then what do you do with Mr. Mott, Mrs. Reeser, Dr. Bentley, none of whom left behind a heart, a lung, a pancreas, a liver, or any other internal organ? But they did leave behind external body parts, half of a leg, a foot.
Uh-huh.
So again,
Right.
Mark Benecki knows this because he has seen our research, he has seen the photographs, and yet he persists in this myth that SHC is impossible because internal organs are always left behind at these fire scenes. No, they are not.
No, so far from what you've shown me, it's all just if you're lucky, like a foot, half a foot, a leg.
Mhm.
That's it. I'm gonna
It's
ask you,
it's
in these I'm gonna segue real quick off of this. In
okay.
these, and I know because it sounds like you've done so much extensive um research into this. In these, I'm not talking more recent. When I mean recent, 60s, were these really old ones? Did you ever get explanation where somebody thought it was either occult, like witchcraft, or God struck them down, or anything like that? Like, did you ever come across any explanation on that? In other words, science didn't figure on it. It was like the wrath of God, you got struck down, or somebody, put a curse on you, kind of deal.
In the 1700s, yes. Uh, the abstinence movement in particular latched onto this flaming fate was the wrath of God coming down
Oh
upon
my God,
immoral,
the
intemperate
temperance.
souls. Yes, yes. They actually they invoke
Oh my
they
God.
accepted this as a reality, but they put that spin, that coloration on it.
Oh my
Um,
God, that's great.
so
I'm
if
sorry, I'm
you if you
laughing because it was like
it's okay.
the teetotaler
We laugh
said,
we laugh too. We laugh too. You have to find some humor in this
yes,
somewhere.
yes, yes.
I'm glad we both found it. Yeah. If you're a drunken old sot, this was divine vengeance, God's wrath coming down on your sorry drunken head. So you don't
I'm
want to burn
you
up,
got
don't drink.
fired.
That was the argument.
That is incredible. That's funny. That is, because that's like, and I imagine there was people that were like, "Oh my God, what?" You know.
Yeah.
But anyway, you were saying that Benecki, he absolutely knows that, that the what he's that his theory is not really accurate because of that's not what's left of victims of
He
human combustion.
yeah, he knows about our research. We actually sat down with Mark in a bar in Belgium when we did a program together for Nat Geo. Um,
Okay.
he knows the Bentley photograph. His counter to that is, well, if you had another photograph from a different angle, you would see the body part, you would see the internal organs. It's just that this clever, conniving photographer picked the one angle that doesn't show the internal organs. Well, we have a second photograph of Dr. Bentley that we have yet to
Mhm.
publicly release, other than to the firefighters that we instructed at the college arson fire courses that we taught. The second photograph of Dr. Bentley's fire scene is taken from a completely different angle, and you will
Right.
not find a single organ in it either. The
And
organs did not exist. Every first responder we spoke to that we could find, and man, we tried to hunt them all down who had any involvement in Dr. Bentley's death. Not a single one of them ever mentioned, ever hinted at, ever alluded to seeing an internal organ
right.
at the fire scene.
I'm thinking,
He
well, the
aside
fire
from the
department would
kneecap and the
issue a
leg.
report, the ME, if there was something, would note it. I mean, besides a
Yes,
photograph is
yeah,
what I'm saying.
yeah,
There would be a
yeah,
report, a written report saying this is what we found. We examined and we found whatever, like you said. So it
yeah,
wouldn't just be photographic or lack thereof that you're going to base like the combustion theory on,
yeah.
especially something
Unfortunately,
like this
in the
type of
yeah,
case.
yeah, in the Bentley case, to our knowledge, there was no coroner's report, just the death certificate.
Oh, really?
Um,
I wonder why.
yeah, don't Pennsylvania at that time may not have required it.
Okay.
Laws were fairly loose back in the day in
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania in this area. Coudersport is a small town, not a big city.
Okay. All
Um,
right.
but the testimony we got from all the first responders coincides with and supports the photographic evidence. The photographic evidence supports the first responders, and that's what we go on. Um, if the responders had said something completely contrary to what the photographs depict, we'd be
Mm-hmm.
having a lot of questions, questioning credibility, authenticity of one or the
What
other.
would
We don't. We don't need to do that.
in in the cases that you have access to this information, and I know I asked you this, but I want to, as far as commonality, anything as far as the weather, any type of weather pattern?
No, again, it was argued in the 17 and 1800s that the cases also occurred in the winter months.
Mm-hmm.
Fireplaces, drop candles,
Right.
all that good stuff for an external ignition source. Um, Looking at the database that we have as a whole, which now contains about 500 cases that fit the construct, the definition, the concept of SHC, we found no common factor in terms of weather or meteorology.
Okay.
Um,
All right. I'm still going around. For you it's, but for me, I'm going around like this is what, what is the trigger, I guess is what I'm looking for. What is what is it that causes this to like, and obviously these people are sitting in their home, how can I say, not doing anything risky, not I'm not walking, I'm not standing under a tree, in a thunderstorm kind of deal. And why is it that
Yeah,
it happens?
yeah. This is all you just triggered memory. Roy Sullivan holds the world's record for being struck by lightning and surviving.
Okay.
I think the number is 7 times,
What?
and yet
Like,
he never burned up from all these lightning strikes like
mm-hmm.
Dr. Bentley did or Mary Reeser did. And in fact, lightning strike victims, we've spoken to some of them, their burns are quite different from the subject that we're describing to you today. Um,
How does one survive 7 lightning strikes? It's incredible.
that is a wonderful question in and of itself. Yeah, Roy Sullivan is truly another mystery of human biology. To have been struck 7 times and survived 7 times. Um, in fact, one time he wasn't struck, but his wife, who was near him, was almost hit by lightning.
Oh,
So it seemed that he was clearly attracting
right. I was gonna say it
electrical
sounds like there's
discharge.
something
Yeah,
that's
and
attracting.
and and what enabled him to survive and not be fried to a crisp um,
Mm-hmm.
is quite astonishing.
Yes.
We,
Yes.
as we said, we do not believe these fires are caused by an oxidizing type of combustion fire or blaze. Um, we look at bioelectricity. We look at things more arcane like quantum physics and
Mm-hmm.
kundalini. Um, we've looked at geophysics with the fire lane concept. We've considered things from cosmology and astrophysics,
Okay.
states of consciousness, the attitude, the emotional behavior of the individual. All these things we
Okay.
have to consider at this point because we, as we said earlier, have been unsuccessful in identifying a single mechanism or a single set of factors common to all the victims.
Okay. And again, this is, and from what you're saying, there is no common, not what caused it, but when you look at, besides the ones that you said in Great Britain that follow that line, is there anything about the people in of themselves that they're alike in something? Not because they're related, but something about whether it's, well, now you said that's like 50-50 as far as gender. So
Mhm.
forget the thing where one, women versus men. Um, age, anything like that? That
Yep.
does nothing. Nope.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
We've looked for commonality. Again, the cases from the 17 and 1800s, even the early 1900s, we never get this information about medications, about
Right. No, it's different.
personality profile types, about lifestyles in general,
Yes.
um, mental attitudes, emotional attitudes. That is something that even to this day is not recorded by fire departments when they are mopping up after a fatal fire scene. Um,
Well, it's
so
you.
we
You
have to get
almost
this.
think that they're not going to ask those types of questions, though.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? They're just going to
Oh,
report on what they
absolutely.
find, and
Yep.
that's it. The facts, and that's it. They're not going to ask like, you know, something like that as far as what maybe the person, unless even then, medications. It's like, all right, what kind of medication is going to make you burst into flame? As far as
Mhm.
I know of, there's no such thing. I hope, but uh,
We hope too. Yeah,
yeah,
there'd be a mega lawsuit pending if there is one, but we
yeah,
haven't
right.
heard
It's
of
like,
such.
has how about? I'm going to ask you this: any familial burnings where families or relations experience the same thing?
In SHC, not that we recollect at this
Mm-hmm.
moment. Um,
Okay.
you're getting more into the poltergeist type of fire phenomena, looking at that angle. And we have spoken to some families that have experienced poltergeist fires, where
Okay.
objects, and in a few rare cases, actually clothing of the clothing of residents in poltergeist fire households has caught fire. Um,
Okay.
but we have not been able to make a connection between the classic poltergeist spirit
Right.
type
Mm-hmm.
fire phenomena events with spontaneous or sudden human combustion events.
And those the thing with the fire poltergeist, is it the same thing where they have usually an adolescent in the household? Is that one of the things that's found?
Usually, yes, not always, but generally that is
Okay.
the case. We looked at one case in Warncliffe, West Virginia, back in the early 1980s. We actually went to
Mhm.
the scene. We met with the fire officials involved in trying to figure out that baffling bevy of blazes. Um,
Okay.
was focused on a minister's family. Gene Clemens was the
A
minister.
minister's family? Oh boy.
Minister's family. Um, Sadly, we got there the day after the last open blaze combustion event happened, but the
Okay.
firemen told us that they were. It's a long story.
Mhm.
Or just pick out a couple of salient points. They had responded to the house several times. They had first disconnected the power meter at the house, then they
Okay.
disconnected the power at the utility pole, kept coming back with calls for new outbursts of fires. Um, One that comes to mind, they were running down the hallway in Mr. Clemens' house. They ran past the bathroom. The bathroom was perfectly intact because they were headed to the a child's bedroom at the end of the hallway because a mattress had begun to burst into flame. As they were picking up the flaming mattress to take it out the hallway and outside, as they passed the bathroom a second time, they looked in and noticed that bath towels on a towel rack in the bathroom were now ablaze. Clearly, in the few seconds of going past the bathroom and coming back past the bathroom, nobody had gone into the bathroom and lit the
Right.
towels on
There was
fire.
no there was nobody there that
Right.
arson,
There
in
was
other words.
an outlying building, cement block building that was padlocked, had no power to it. They saw smoke coming out of the eaves of the building. When they unlocked the door, they discovered that a artificial Christmas tree had caught fire and had partially melted in the locked cement block building. We actually have part of that Christmas tree in our collection. Um, Mattresses, chairs, clothing would burn. The Clemens family was trying to rescue property from the house. They put clothing in one of their vehicles, and as they're driving away from the vehicle down the road, they passed a fire truck coming back to respond to another fire call at the house. The clothing in the
My
van
God.
caught fire. I mean, it was just a bizarre bevy of blazes. Um,
How
Never
long did
got
they
a real.
experience this?
Yeah,
Was it just days or
you're testing our recollection. We think it went for about a week and a half or 2 weeks.
okay.
Don't hold us to that.
No, no, but that's a
Um,
pretty long time when you've got fires busting out in your
yeah.
house.
In meeting with the fire chief, we asked if there were any other unusual fires happening in his jurisdiction around the same time, and guess what? There were. We went up on a
Ah,
fire tower with a topo map, plotted all these other fires that he had problems explaining on the topo map and
okay.
looked for patterns. And what we discovered that there's about, I think, 9 blazes that we plotted, 9 or 10 blazes that we plotted, not just at the Clemens household, but elsewhere in the vicinity of Warncliffe. And all those fires could fall on the perimeter of 2 circles, each one a mile in diameter.
Really interesting.
Really.
And in the same type of situation where these fires were just happening and they couldn't figure out how.
The other fires around Warncliffe were not as dramatic, not as intense, not
Mhm.
as numerous as the collection of fires that befell the Clemens property. But again, the fire department simply said we had no explanation of why this match ignited at this location or this light bulb exploded at this other location and so on. While we did have the opportunity to experience, even though we missed by one day, the last open blaze combustion was we were called out with the fire department to another home that fell in one of these mile in diameter circles and could feel a hot spot in the mattress at that residence, a hot spot that moved around inside the mattress. You could hold your hand, as we did, above the mattress and feel heat at that spot, and that spot moved around. No open
So
flame combustion.
in other words, that's incredible that I
Mhm.
can imagine this fire department must have been
They
figuratively
were
and literally
bumfuzzled.
pulling their hair out.
Yeah, they were bumfuddled. They had no explanation. All they could do was respond again and again and again to a fire call. Did everything that they knew to do to eliminate
Hmm.
a potential fire source,
Right.
but their knowledge could not preclude these fires from continuing to spontaneously ignite. And
And
then
then
it, it
did they all stop peter out at the same time, more or
and then
less?
about the same time, yeah, the phenomenon ended, and they went about their normal business of responding to trash fires and clothing fires and so on, all of which had conventional, easily understood explanations, but not for the fires that happened at the Clemens household.
When the Clemens family left that house, did they keep experiencing this, or was it just when they were in that one house?
Wonderful question, and we're going to wave off on that. We don't know the
Okay.
answer. We
Okay.
suspect had it followed them, we would have heard about it and been called
Right.
out to another location. That did not happen. But with
Okay.
as we said throughout this interview, we try to approach the subject scientifically and intellectually honestly. So we did not follow up to actually confirm whether or not the phenomenon persisted in pursuing the family. We just do not know.
Right. Right. And the reason why I ask is, poltergeist activity sometimes will follow a family around. In other words, when they relocate, they still get the phenomena occurring, whatever, however it manifests. So in other words, they realize I can't outrun this, and exactly like you said, it'll stop just as suddenly as it started. Sometimes just one day it stops or it peters out, and that's why
Right.
I asked that question. So again, that thing about, is it the location, 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 like in real estate? Interesting, interesting. And what you described, where they had actually turned off the electricity. In
Mhm.
other words, they were trying to, anything that they could say, "Oh, this is occurring because what, a short circuit in the wiring of the
Right.
house," anything,
Yeah.
and they're
It
still
was said
getting
when
that.
yeah, when Gene Clemens told us what initially happened at the house, there were electric blue sparks coming out of wall outlets, catching things on
What?
fire like drapery. And so the fire department would think, yeah, it's an electrical system. We're going to kill the power at the meter, and they did that.
Hmm.
And then they went to the pole and killed the power there, and the phenomena continued. So clearly, it was not 120-volt electric related. It was something else.
And then you're thinking, okay, is this actually? Oh, here we go, traveling through the electrical um wiring. And I'm gonna real quick. This was many years ago. I was in South Florida, and I was doing something, and all of a sudden, it wasn't, by the way, the weather wasn't really bad, but a tornado, which is unusual for South Florida, touched down. And I'm coming down the street, and all of a sudden, I'm looking through the yards, and I see things flying in the air, and you're trying to like somehow like figure it out. Bottom line, this thing was coming. I had to put the brakes on and back up. But I saw this blue light inside that tornado, or that electricity, that you never, I've never seen that light and that color anywhere else except in that moment. It was a very electric blue light. I know. It's a very unusual, one of a kind blue light,
Mhm.
okay, that I saw, and makes me think, is this the same? It's something like, how can I say this? Produced by nature. How's that?
Mhm.
That's what I saw when I looked at that, and I put my car in reverse and got out of the way of that little mini tornado coming across the yards. But it was very unusual. Like I said, I've never seen that color like bursting inside the tornado, as it was cutting across. And then again, that's, I guess, but is this something that's produced by nature, versus man-made somehow? How's that? I don't know.
It works for us. It sounds like ball lightning, which again, when we were beginning our education in this lifespan, was something that mainstream science poo-pooed. Doesn't happen.
Hmm.
These are old wives' tale superstition, which has also been said of
Right.
SHC. And now it's perfectly acceptable in mainstream science. And as we said, it can be created in a laboratory under controlled conditions. The problem with our subject that we're focusing on right now is that whatever is the mechanism that causes this phenomenon is not something that we believe can be taken to a laboratory and reproduced under controlled conditions, because we still don't
Okay.
understand what those conditions are. Yeah, this is a
Right,
quote
and
that
that's
we
that's the
just love.
problem right there, which I think happens in a lot of cases where, like you said, it cannot be reproduced in laboratory, so that and because of that, it's discounted. It's like, "Oh, you can't reproduce this in a lab? Well, then I guess that doesn't exist." You
Yeah.
know?
Scientists tend to like things that they think they can understand, and
Mhm.
based on their understanding, reproduce and confirm or refute. Um, but that involve that's the scientific methodology.
Yes.
Um, this doesn't lend itself to that. This is truly spontaneous. We don't know when it's going to happen. We can't predict exactly where it will happen, although the fire lane idea gives us some places to look and to suspect. Um, but it's easier, as we said repeatedly to you, Marlene, that so many in mainstream fire science find this subject so distressing, so unnerving,
Mhm.
that it's easier to deny it and to debunk it. And this quote from Arthur C. Clarke is a
Right.
gem. Um, in a show about the subject, he said, "Some cases seem to defy explanation and leave me with a very creepy and very unscientific feeling. If there's anything more to SHC, I simply don't want to know." And again, Mr. Clark is entitled to that viewpoint. We have no problem
Sure.
with it. But we believe, as we think we've been able to show to you this today, that there is
Mhm.
clearly something more to the subject than not wanting to know about it. Let's figure this sucker out. Let's see if there are ways to prevent it from happening to people in the future, because this is an ongoing phenomenon. Because it was debunked in 2013 is not going to stop it from happening this year or next year or to somebody.
Sure.
We said kind of facetiously, but perhaps not so much, that if this were to happen to the president of the United States, um, before a bank of microphones and cameras, suddenly science would say, "Oh, we've known
Absolutely.
about this all along, and oh yeah, this is
Yes, right.
SHC,
Oh,
and no
yeah,
big deal. This is how it happens." Yeah, right. We're not there yet.
right.
We're not there yet. Um,
They
as
can't,
Bob,
I wanna say, I'm gonna say this. I'm a very big believer in the scientific method and in
Mhm.
science, but sometimes when you get hooked on that, that's the only way to explain something, and and anything else is it doesn't exist or is not valid. I think we do ourselves a disfavor, because just because you can't explain it scientifically doesn't mean it doesn't exist or it's possible.
We so concur with that statement, Marlene. Absolutely. Bob Meslin, the fire photographer, fire marshal in the Conway case, he told us, as so many other fire instructors have told us, and this is a direct quote from Bob, one of the prime prerequisites of an investigator is to have an open mind.
Yes.
We absolutely embrace that. We hope that pervades all the research that we have done on this subject and other Fortean phenomena that we've looked into. Because without an open mind, as you correctly say, you're locking out, you're blocking, you're blinding yourself to a lot of
Mhm.
possibilities. And when
Sure.
you're looking at something that seems not to make any common sense and
Yes.
defies what you think you understand about the subject, if you don't have an open mind, you're going to remain oblivious to some possibilities that could be really revelatory and insightful.
Not too far from where I live is the State Fire College. I wonder what
Huh.
stories they would say. Because sometimes, and the reason why I say this, and this I think happens in all these fields, there's these internal stories that will circulate. Like, but what you said, if you ask them out and out, they'll say, I don't know. But amongst themselves,
Hmm.
certain stories circulate, some even about this subject, that it's like, off the record, I'll talk about it, but I'm never going to admit to it, because then I'll become like, the laughing stock, or hey, even now, even when things are a little bit more open-minded about unusual occurrences, they'll be like, "Nah, nah, no, I don't know what you're talking about." But that happens, I think, a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does happen. We have seen that with personal stories that would affirm what you've just said, and it recalls going back to the Reeser case, when we went down to St. Pete, August of 2013, to do some additional research, to get some more photographs, we stopped by the fire department. Now, this is still the most famous single fire fatality in the jurisdiction of the St. Pete Police Department, Mrs. Reeser's death in 1951. And yet we discovered that a lot of the current members of that department, including fire officers, have
Mm-hmm.
no conscious knowledge of this amazing fire that happened in their jurisdiction. Just as a historical curiosity, we think they would all know
Right.
about Mrs. Reeser. It
Right.
wasn't that long ago, and yet,
Yeah, you would think they would have a couple
it,
of pictures up,
yeah,
like somewhere in the
uh-huh,
firehouse, like, hey,
they didn't.
because
They
just
didn't
this,
even know about
we
it.
never figured this one out.
Right? Yeah, doesn't happen. Um, which again is one way that this subject is so easily dismissible. Um, the history of it
Yes.
has been lost to many in the current scientific, medical, and fire science communities. And if you don't know your history, it's easy to deny what you don't know.
I'm going to ask you real quick before I forget. That case that you said that the two women that they were in the same bed, one incinerated, and did anything happen to the other woman? No, no burns, nothing.
According to the original source that we discovered in a dusty volume at the College of Physicians in Philadelphia, the answer is no.
Wow. I don't understand because I, I mean, and again, I'm going to come back to my own personal experience that you just, if you come close to a fire, just getting close to it, you feel the heat. All right. In other words, you don't have to be standing in the fire to be burned by the fire. How's that? Because the heat intensifies as you get closer to it. And yeah, I can't even now. I I finished putting a, burning a even now it was like 5 days ago. If you get close to my burn pile, which I had very big logs, you still feel the heat
Hmm.
coming off of it.
Sure.
And that was 5 days ago.
Yeah. And that's one of the arguments that we hear from the naysayers. Larry, you don't understand. Fire doesn't generate a lot of radiant lateral heat, it burns upward. Well, again, we've given you several cases where there was no evidence of
Right.
the fire heat rising upwards, and it doesn't radiate outward very far. Most of this is towards the internal part of the body and downward, it seems. If you have a moment, we'll give you the exact quotes from
Yes.
the case that we just talked that you just raised again. Going back
Yes.
to our notes, this is from our book ABLAZE. On November 10, 1731, a fierce but localized fire had ravaged a 68-year-old female in Vitry, a remote village in Haute-Saône, France. The woman who lived alone fell and struck her head. Uh, Sorry, we got the wrong clip here. We'd have to dig deeper for that other one. Sorry, never mind.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it because what you explained, and it was enough that it was noted. How's that?
Yeah, yeah,
All right. It's not like now that, everything, the newspapers, everything prints everything about everybody, about, whatever. That it
and
seems so unusual that somebody
yeah.
took note of it.
On that point, let us add this: a lot of these early cases were reported not by ignorant,
Yes.
uninformed, stupid neighbor bystanders. They were reported by
Right.
physicians. The
Yes.
case in Vitry that we started to quote was by a physician, Père Cron. The case that so fascinates you, where the one body was burned, incinerated next to another person who slept through the ordeal of her bedmate, was, we believe, reported also by a physician. People with medical training, at least.
Yes.
Um, so these are not happenstance, carelessly reported
Yes.
hearsay.
Yeah, they're the closest thing to a trained observer, if you want to call them that. And back then, also, which people don't realize, it's not like now that you call 911 and you get transported. Back then, doctors would run
Mm.
to the location, let's say in the house, you know, to aid or to, and even the police sometimes, if they found a deceased person, they would call it was the doctor or coroner to come, and even then, very shortly, they would have what they call a coroner's inquest to determine cause of death. So they always relied a lot of times on the police and or a physician that had arrived to give them the information or their opinion of what caused the death. So I understand what you're saying, that this was not the guy next door. It says, well, I think usually they were looking to people that had some type of education to say what they saw or what they observed, that kind of thing.
A few of these, a very few of these cases have made it to mainstream medical literature. One that comes immediately to mind happened in Aberdeen, Scotland in 1888. The gentleman was found in the hayloft of a barn, uh, looking intact, clearly burned, but the whole body you could recognize, legs, the torso, the head was all there in the photograph that was taken and published in the British Medical Journal in 1888 and investigated by a physician, Dr. Mackenzie Booth. When the body was attempted to be picked up for removal from the hayloft of the barn, the hay, by the way, did not burn. The body of the victim, Mr. AM, crumbled to powder when touched. So completely
Wow.
dehydrated. Now, how does a
Yes.
body completely dehydrate itself, surrounded by straw, that is not burned?
Exactly. You would have thought
Um,
that barn would have gone up.
there you go.
There's a talk about material for a fire to keep going, and it makes you wonder what is it about the body that is what is the what's it called? What's the ingredient
Hmm.
in that body that it's like maybe once it's burnt, that's it, that it's over. It's like a flash thing and nothing else. That's so interesting. That's because I was aware of human combustion before. I've heard of the cases, but not with the information that you've given, as far as that nothing else around it really was affected by what appears to be a very, very high. Um, and again, I'm going to come back that people don't realize how much heat is necessary when bodies are cremated,
Yeah.
how hot those crematoriums are in
We've
order to reduce it to dust.
yeah. We've run some mathematical calculations to incinerate, to dehydrate a normal human adult weighing about 180 pounds
Hmm.
requires 34 million calories of heat energy. That's pretty sizable number.
And for
And
quite a while, it's not like you pop them in there and they're like and they're burned. You got to put them in there for a bit, as
yeah,
far
yeah,
inside the cremation
yeah.
chamber.
We've argued this to so many people who want to deny SHC. If it is so easy to burn a body by dropping a lit cigarette or match on a cadaver,
Hmm.
as you would claim it to be by invoking the wick effect, then why do crematorium owner operators spend $100,000 on a retort, on filtration equipment, on licensing fees, on a cremulator to grind up the bone
Yes.
fragments?
Yes.
They wouldn't do that. They're business people. They would buy a pack of matches and a carton
And
of cigarettes
that's
and
it.
light the cigarette, go out, have a leisurely lunch, come back and
It's
scrape
over.
up the ashes and put it in the urn and give to the next of kin. They don't do that because they can't do that.
As a matter of fact, I want to interject my little morbid story here. They have found that some of these well, they call them basically they're as a matter of fact they are sometimes they don't have their own crematoriums. Basically, they do the service, they pick up the body. Let's say they've been contracted, but as far as if the person or the family wants a cremation, they take them to a certain place that has the cremation oven or
Mhm.
whatever it is. And some of them have run out of money because of the cost involved. And later on they found, there's been scandals about people
Mm,
that they have found bodies that were supposed to be cremated that weren't. A couple
right,
of funeral homes have gotten in trouble. My point being that yes, that it takes specialized equipment and there's a type of expense involved because it's not like you said, hey, go back out there and throw a match on the body, and then hey, in a couple of hours, that's it. All you've got is dust.
right. Yeah.
You know,
We actually identified, to our knowledge, the only person in this country, perhaps in the world, who is both a fire chief and a crematorium owner. He lives and works in New Jersey.
all right.
We traveled to New Jersey and sat down with the gentleman. Um, he commands a well staffed, well equipped, modern fire department in an upscale
Okay.
community in New Jersey, and he owns and operates a crematorium.
Okay.
And we showed him the photographs that we've been sharing with your audience today.
Mm-hmm.
He had no idea, as a fire chief, that a body could burn itself like Mrs. Reeser or Dr. Bentley or George Mott did to their bodies. He had no idea, as a crematorium owner operator, that a body could burn so completely outside of a retort, and even in a retort, not so completely. He was quite mystified and astonished that this phenomenon exists. He did not know about it.
Yes. The you know that they've
That's how
had problems.
restrictive.
They even have to be so careful because now because of the heat, they have to take out any pacemakers, or if there's
Hmm.
any metal in the person's body,
Right.
they have to remove it because they can't, because of the high heat, they can't incinerate because it'll, as a matter of fact, I think it just basically breaks down the oven, the heating agent. So they have to make sure that they remove anything
Hmm.
that was metal inside a person,
This is true.
because of the high heat. Yes, and people don't realize.
Sure.
That's why I'm saying
Yeah.
that to produce, when you see those pictures of these people that all you've got is a shoe and, you know a foot in a shoe. It's like, that's, how much heat you have to do that to produce that.
Hmm.
It's incredible that that this can happen in a room, you know, out of nowhere. No accelerant. The house or the room doesn't burn down, and nothing is left.
Yep.
And I imagine people are being identified because, well, that's where they lived, and that looks like their foot, but otherwise, there's nothing left to ID
Yeah,
them.
yeah. In the Bentley case, Don Gosnell, who discovered the fire scene, thought initially he was looking at the leg of a mannequin on Dr. Bentley's
Okay.
bathroom floor, until he got down close and examined it and realized it wasn't a mannequin leg; it was a human leg.
Oh
Um,
man, that's a
we've had a couple
sad
cases where
moment.
the body is burned so badly that, because there's just one extremity left that clearly is human, that it can be determined that, yes, this whole pile of powder once was Mr. Mott or Dr. Bentley.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in fact, it was claimed in the Reeser case from Florida, from St. Pete, that she had been waylaid in her apartment, taken off premises, killed, and burned off site, and then the ashes were brought back in and salted in her apartment, which makes no sense whatsoever. But that's how desperate the officials were back in 1951 to try to make sense of her fire scene. Um,
Let me ask you. I'm going to ask you because I looked at one of the slides that you sent me. Something
mhm.
having to do with Jack Angel.
Oh, okay, sure. This is a whole nother subset of the phenomenon that our critics just absolutely despise us for broaching. But as we said, we follow the best evidence, and where it takes us is where it leads us. Jack Angel is a subset of the phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion, in that he is a survivor of partial SHC.
Okay.
We've sat down with Mr. Angel. We sat down with two of his attorneys. Here is the basic story. Jack Angel was a traveling salesman in 1974. He used a motorhome as a traveling showroom. He had an appointment scheduled to meet with a potential client in Savannah, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning, if memory serves, in 1974. He parked the motorhome outside of a Ramada Inn because the room that he had booked had been given to someone else. He spent the night in his motorhome, expecting to wake up the following morning to meet with his potential client. He did not awaken the following morning. According to him, he awakened several days later to discover that his right forearm was charred to the bone, burned black
Oh,
from his fingers to his elbow. He had other injuries to his body of a burned nature to his chest, the nape of his neck, around his groin. Disc in his spinal column had fused. He had difficulty walking thereafter. Nonetheless, he awakened, got dressed, feeling no pain, and exited the motorhome, only to collapse and faint in the Ramada Inn. When Jack Angel regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by a team of physicians at the Savannah General Memorial Hospital. Physicians trying to figure out how their patient had been burned in the fashion that he was. We have the medical reports for Jack's treatment. He was diagnosed having burns, quote unquote, internal in origin. We know no way to interpret that phrase other than that he burned from the inside out. We mentioned two attorneys in Atlanta. They took the case attempting to file a multi-million dollar lawsuit against the manufacturer of the motorhome in which Jack slept. They looked for electrical faults, they looked for water failures, they looked for lightning strikes, they looked for anything external that would have caused the injuries to Mr. Angel that could be attributed in some way to the motorhome. They came up empty-handed. A week before trial, they pulled the case from the docket because they could not meet the burden of proof. They told us. These were two very astute, very smart, very savvy attorneys who were looking for a multi-million dollar return on their investment. They got none. As we said, the medical documentation from Jack Angel's treatment says that the burns were internal in origin. Jack is the first survivor of partial spontaneous human combustion that we had the pleasure to interview. We've now spoken to about 24 others. Not everybody burns to powder in this phenomenon. It can be survived, but the mystery still remains. Why does it happen to a few people and not to so many others? What is the nature of the injury? What is the nature of the energy that causes the body to smoke or to blister, if not completely burn itself to powder?
and what happened? Did he lose his arm? I take it, or
The arm, the tissue of his right forearm was burned so severely that the medical team gave him a choice of two options. One, reconstructive surgery, which is going to be prolonged, painful, with no guarantee of success. The second option was amputation. Jack opted for amputation.
okay. I would think, and again, didn't they? Wouldn't it be difficult? Like, how can this one part of your body be so burnt, but then the rest of you, because I don't know about the rest of him, because it sounds like there was certain parts of him that got very burnt, but there was, you would think he would have died, like he would have incinerated. Like, how does one part get spared and the other one burn so badly?
That's a question that's going to have to be answered by somebody else or answered by us when we get more insight. Right now, we have no answer to that. It is a fascinating anomaly and an intriguing mystery that's looking for a solution.
I did
Our
not know
naysayers
that there
say
was
that
such a thing as survivors of human
yeah,
combustion.
our
Wow.
naysayers in the Jack Angel case say that, oh, Larry, you must realize that Mr. Angel scalded himself with hot water. Well, these are
Oh,
not hot water scalding injuries that he had. He had internal damage to the body. And again, we're going to believe the medical professionals who treated his injuries rather than some naysayer sitting on a sofa couch somewhere guessing what had to have happened. We'll trust
sure.
the physicians attending Mr. Angel when they say the burns were quote unquote internal in origin. Let it go. Figure it out.
And what woke him up was not pain. He just woke up.
Woke up, no pain. He only experienced pain when he regained consciousness in the hospital. And then he told us that it was painful like you would expect a burn of such severity to feel.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And that's the thing that, again, and he was asleep, which
He was
is,
asleep.
yeah, makes you wonder, like, is there something that happens in that moment where a person is either asleep or close to falling asleep? Oh God, the questions are endless, and I imagine you've probably had more than I could ever think of. Larry, this has been so absolutely fascinating. You were saying you mentioned something that are you working on another book or an updated version of your book?
What we are attempting to do now is to take individual cases, Mrs.
Okay.
Weiser, Dr. Bentley, and others, and throw into a book devoted to each singular case all the information, all the photographs that we've acquired in almost 50 years of documenting the subject, so that
Okay.
at least what we've been able to acquire, and as we said, many of the cases that we've put in our book ABLAZE would have been lost to history, would be lost to history had we not doggedly pursued the events, the cases, the photographs. So we don't want this information to be lost, so that after our physical transition, somebody can come along and say, oh, that stupid Larry Arnold back then, he believed in this silly thing called SHC. He's a pseudoscientist. He's a mystery monger. There's nothing to this. No, the information that we have amassed will stand the test of time. It demands to be studied by perhaps someone smarter than we are, but at least we have done the legwork. For new medical mystery. Whether we get the Nobel Prize in medicine someday, we're not holding our breath, but we'd like to get it. It would be nice.
Well, you know what? Maybe at some point, maybe there will be some type of explanation. You know, who knows? I mean, it's not something that's totally out of the realm. Something, there's so many things now that are explained that 200 years ago were a total mystery. Like, how does that happen? And now we understand.
Our father, when we came out of college in the late 60s, and we do some experimentations on energy fields,
Mm-hmm.
he said, first, you're going to burn the house down, Larry. And secondly, there's nothing more to discover because everything that is known is already known. Now, that was before the day of the internet, among other things. A Pony
Uh-huh.
Express rider in the early 1830s would say it's absolutely absurd to think that a package or a letter could be delivered from New York City to California in less than 2 weeks ride. Just impossible. Can't be done. Things change. Knowledge
Yes.
advances. Learning progresses if you have an open mind. And
Yes.
someday, learning to reflect on Bob Meslin's quote again, that you need to keep an open mind.
Yes.
Someday somebody's going to figure out at least some of the cases that we've been able to document over the lifetime that we've spent looking into this subject. Um, Maybe us,
Well, no,
if not
this
us,
is the
somebody
thing
else.
and then they're gonna look back and they go, oh man, all those closed-minded so-called scientists that were like, nah, it doesn't. And
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Like you get your vindication at the end of everything. But you never know. You never know when you least expect it. But at the same time, I'm gonna put in my 2 cents worth because I say it. Life is interesting because of its mysteries.
Well said. The universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for wits to grow sharper. And we hope
Absolutely.
we've sharpened the wits of your audience a bit
Yes.
during this discussion on this amazing,
And it's been
fascinating,
wonderful.
frightening, eerie subject.
I know.
It is all of those things.
Because really all my questions are like, what do I avoid so that I don't become like like don't go here, don't do that, whatever, don't wear this, don't be there. No, no answers there. Let me ask you, Larry, what is your website for my podcast listeners if they want to get more information on this? Where can
Sure.
they go to?
We'd be love to explore the subject further with your listeners. Questions, comments, possible leads on a new case, please get
Mm-hmm.
in touch with us. The way to do that simply is to go to parascience.com. You'll find our contact information there. The email address for this specific subject is real simple. It's shchappens at gmail.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Contact us with ideas, suggestions, and best of all, if possible, a lead on a case that we don't know about. We were spending our
Yes.
time, the money out of our hip pocket. This is all self-funded research. Um, but it's something that
Hey,
clearly has intrigued us, has captivated us, because we're not mystery mongering. The mystery
right,
is in the subject and the evidence that this phenomenon produces, and it's crying out for serious study by mainstream science. Until that happens, at least it has us to pursue the
right.
subject and the mystery.
Maybe you'll get a story about how Uncle Barney caught fire and nobody, the only
Yeah,
ones that knew
yeah.
about it was a family and be like, okay, well, because there's stuff
We
like that.
we
There's always stories
yeah,
like that.
true. We know that this is, let us say this as we close down. This is a rare phenomenon. If it were common, it would not be so easily dismissed and disbelieved. Having said
Right.
that, we also know that there are cases that we have yet to discover. We've had some intriguing leads, but without enough information or detail to enable us to track them down. We got lucky with Mrs. Conway. Maybe one of
Right.
your listeners will get us the information
Yeah.
that we need to
Somebody that
find
works at a
another
fire
fascinating
department
case.
also. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Because sometimes you would think, and sometimes again, some of these departments are insulated as far as
Mm,
weird stories.
mhm.
That the only ones that know about it are the guys that work there or in the town or even in the time period. Because
Right.
let's face it, 30 or 40 years ago, like what you found, the guys that were working there have all retired. And if they didn't keep the story, and then every once
Right.
in a while you'll get
Yeah.
somebody that'll go, well, you know what? I heard this story that back
Mm,
in 59, this they went to this place and God, they
yeah.
only found somebody belt buckle or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. On that point precisely, with the Bentley case, the first responders, the people at the fire scene, were so nonplussed, so disturbed by what they saw, they kept it to themselves. The
Mm-hmm.
front page news
Yes.
story 2 days after Dr. Bentley's transition, announcing his death and giving him a front page obit, did not provide any clues as to the true nature of the fire scene.
Died unexpectedly.
In yeah, and we covered this case first on national television on the program That's Incredible in 1980. It just so happened that Dr. Bentley's son and his wife were watching that
Wow.
program. That is the first time Dr. Bentley's son understood and realized how his father had transitioned.
Wow.
Nobody in Countersport had told him the details of the fire scene.
Can you
So
imagine
this
that?
was,
His
as you
own
say, a
son?
very insulated, isolated subject that was not talked about. And as we said,
Yes.
basically to this day, the details would not be known had we not doggedly discovered and pursued it.
I can imagine. And I think that sometimes a lot of these that we're getting into the ego, they don't want to say we don't know. Because I would imagine that if they told his son would be, but how can this happen? And what are they going to tell him? We just don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, we'll just not go there. And we'll give the explanations, that it was a pipe or a cigarette or whatever and leave it at that. Again, Larry, has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you. I'm going to put a link to in the credits of the show to your website, but I'll be looking forward to speaking to you again so we could talk about this. This is fascinating.
Wonderful. Thank you. This has been an enjoyable evening for us. You've been a great interviewer, wonderful questions, great enthusiasm, and we've hoped we spurred some curiosity and
Yes,
questions among your
absolutely.
audience as well. Have
Take
at us.
care.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye,
Thank you,
Larry.
dear.
Bye, sweetheart. Wow. Can you tell I was trying to figure that one out? What did they do or not do? So I'll make sure not to do or not do that or be at a certain place. Like what? When you can go, psh, and to me personally, I think it's fascinating because there is no explanation. I mean, you can, like what Larry's done, that you've collected all these stories, all these circumstances, and besides that linear thing in Britain that has the higher number, that's interesting in and of itself because think about it. I was thinking when he brought that up, I was like thinking of ley lines. Ley lines, how the certain things happen along certain ley lines, that even certain ancient structures are found along ley lines. But I'm thinking, wait, that's different. If people bursting into flame, that's like, yeah, make sure you don't live along this certain type of line, because you could bust out. And that, again, when you read about and some of what he was describing, the circumstances that exist before and after, and even what you saw those pictures, as far as um, what's left of these people, you think, how can this be? How can how can the nothing be left of a person? person except the shoe, their foot, or below the knee, or that lady where it's the two legs. All right, and they're right there. What you're looking at, that's Larry right there. Um, you know that you're like, I don't know. I'm one of these people that I'll just go round and round with this because to me it's like, how does and I have to laugh because sometimes we look at things and we think that, oh, you know what, if especially if it happened a while back, oh, I'd figure that one out. How did that happen? Let me tell you, whether it was few hundred years ago or more recently, uh, there's still no explanation. There's no how what's the what I'm looking for? There's no rhyme or reason. All right, and I think that's what that does a head number on me because I'm always trying to find what is the common denominator. You know, what was it that all these people shared that, of course, somebody like Larry who's gone through, done the basically he's dissected all these cases and looked at the background and looked at the circumstances and spoken to people and spoken to witnesses and in other words things maybe that weren't even written up in a report or in the newspaper article. He's actually spoken to people who were there trying to see, okay, you know what, I found after all these years or I'm speaking to all these people, yeah, they're different but they all had this one little thing going on. And again, you can't go back. Look at that. This lady's no, this was I'm sorry, this was Bentley. This was Dr. Bentley's foot with a slipper on. Um, that you would think that you can't go back and ask these people that. Well, I'm wondering, and I should have asked them about that gentleman, the Jack Angel that had partially incinerated. Did you feel anything different that day? I mean, it sounds like what he fell asleep. Look at that. That one where he's got the legs. That's so weird. It's disturbing, but very weird. That you want to ask them anything. What did you wake up that day feeling a certain way in your body? Uh, I don't know. You have heartburn. Anything that you could say. Well, this is the how can I say something that you felt in your body internally, but there's no way to go back and ask them this. And of course, this gentleman right there, which I didn't know until I actually asked him. I thought that this slide about Jack Angel was going to talk about another person that had died, you know, and no, he was a survivor, which I didn't know. And then again, you ask yourself, why do some people totally like turn to dust and somebody like Jack Angel only partially? Was there something that interrupted it? Was there something that was missing in the body? Was it somebody that had drunk a lot of water? And by the way, I'm not gonna go the temperance movement as in you're full of alcohol and that's why you burst into flame. I'm talking, what if you're one of these people that normally drinks a lot of water and maybe that's what saved you, and maybe these other people that went, they didn't drink that much water. They drank water, but maybe they were dehydrated. How's that? I don't know. I'm making stuff up as I go along. All right, and here's again. Look at this. They're shoveling dust particles. All right, like, but you've got a standing building. And again, I've done research in other cases, not having to do obviously with human combustion, but true crime in this, where you know, uh, especially some of these like serial killers and other people that they try to get rid of a body by burning it. They'll even put it in these ovens, if they've got access to them. And even then, they will still find teeth and other pieces that just do not burn away, even if the body's been stuck in there for like a really long time in very high heat. In other words, and there's other times that, and then I'm sure you've heard of people that they'll say by the time they find the body, they'll say, there's evidence that whoever killed this person tried to burn them first. Again, thinking this thing that, oh, I'm just gonna throw a match and this thing is going, and they find they can't burn it. They can't burn it to the point of what they want to do with it because people will have this idea in their head of how efficient fire is. And when it comes to disposing of bodies, not really. Again, in some cases, they'll do it to maybe destroy DNA evidence, or maybe make it difficult to identify the person, even though nowadays with DNA or dental records they could still, but it's not as easy, again, to cover up even a crime by burning the body. This wigs me out. That picture right there. And for my podcast listeners, this is two ladies' legs. Basically, what's left of somebody that was sitting in a chair with just two legs and from the thighs down, hanging out on the hanging out on the thing. That's very disturbing. Yes, yes, yes. And um, I would love to find out. I'm going to follow up with him as far as what happens with this other book that he's going to do. All right, where um, where he details the background on all these cases, because I think, because let's face it, I consider this part of the paranormal, even though you can tell he really comes around to this from a very, very scientific approach, which is great. But still, again, to me, it falls under the umbrella of the paranormal. And I guess my point is that to me, it's fascinating when somebody does the research, tries to explain it scientifically, gathers all the information, gathers the data, the reports, the interviews, and they still come around and there is no a rational explanation for what happened, right? That's what I think, you know, when it really gets interesting. And like I said, some things that maybe now are looked at as paranormal or weird or unusual or unexplained. 20 years from now, 30 years, 50 years from now, it'll be, hey, you guys, this is what was happening. All right. But, the again, same thing when he said that thing, which I gotta look that up. Somebody that's been struck by lightning 7 times and survived. I didn't know there was such a. I've heard of people that have. I've heard of there's, and I don't know exactly if there's a term used for it. For that, once people get struck by lightning, you you become like an attractor for it. Or there's something like, hey, don't if you're worried about getting struck by lightning, be extra careful once you get struck. Like there's something in the composition of your body that becomes like uh, a lightning strike magnet kind of deal. All those things, again, we don't understand exactly how it happens, but nonetheless, they do. And I think that's why it's so super interesting. And I really hope you like this interview with Larry Arnold. And like I said, I will put a link to his website on the credits of the show. Please check out his information. Also, we'll keep tabs on when he gets this new book out, because he's the expert in this field. And see what other stories, what other cases are like that, because this is definitely one of those phenomena that somehow or other you go round and round and round and you just don't get a good explanation for it. So please don't forget to sign up for my newsletter on Substack. Go to mpellicer.com, miamighostchronicles.com. All my podcasts are available on Spreaker, but they get distributed to all the different podcast platforms across the world. So you can find, like I said, stories of the supernatural, Nightshade Diary, or Supernatural Storytime, and of course the common denominator in all of those is me, MP Pellicer. And again, thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and I look forward to interviewing another interesting person next week. Till then, take care.